So welcome to this session. It's a real pleasure to be here to talk about Anne Lister in relation to state records. So the first thing to say is that I am not an Anne Lister specialist, although I have researched her before. So many of you will probably know a lot more than me. However, I am an expert in sexuality and gender from the National Archives, the UK National Archives. And there I work as Principal Diverse Histories Specialist. So the standpoint I'm really coming from today is an expert in state records relating to gender and sexuality. So I hope that together we can work through kind of various bits of each other's knowledge and help each other understand more. So the research in this area, as you all know, as this summit shows, is ever evolving. So what I'm talking about today is things that have been found kind of so far in our collections, but I wouldn't like to think of it as comprehensive at all. I'm sure there's much more to find, and hopefully in talking about these records, I might kind of highlight more future potentials and avenues that people might want to explore. So what I have done before is deep dived into our collections and come across some items relating to Anne Lister, some which people have already written about, and at other times I have been very much supported by other people's research findings. And so sometimes I'm signposting to things that have already been written about elsewhere. So I do just want to shout out to others who have done incredible work in this area and helped unearth some of these items. So Packed with Potential, In Search of Anne Walker, and the works of various academics as well. So before I get into things, I just wanted to note that Anne Lister is such a rich historical character in terms of sexuality and gender identity. And I hope that this presentation will be open to all those interpretations. So just kind of bear that in mind that I'm not trying to think of a definitive kind of approach, but just be open-minded to all those potential interpretations. I will be using she, her pronouns as Anne did in her life. And just a note on content as well, that some of the things I'll talk about do reference social attitudes of the time and some outdated language, and in particular in relation to mental health. So do bear that in mind. So, first, just to reflect, as someone who works in an archive, on the power of archival evidence. So Lister's story is one that is really rooted in archival knowledge, which is really exciting. It's one that shows the powerful potential of what archives can help us demonstrate. So often lesbian relationships or gender diversity have been denied historically due to a lack of evidence. But in Lister's case, there's this wonderful kind of surviving counterpoint to this, with such rich surviving materials, particularly the diaries. And I think what's significant about this is they offer not only a personal narrative, but kind of a collective one, proof that queer lives have always existed, even if we were not always that visible. What I want to show today is even without the wonderful, rich coded diaries, there is significant evidence of Lister's sexuality and relationships. So what I'm here to do is introduce material that some of you may have been less likely to consider as relevant to Lister's history. And together with these diaries, state records can really help us piece together an even more substantial kind of view of her life. So this session, just to explain what we're going to cover, we're going to look at what the National Archives, the UK National Archives is, and what records we hold. I'll have a bit of an exploration of records relating to Anne Lister. That will be the bulk of the presentation. And then have some brief reflections on how to use the collections, and then time for questions. So to introduce the National Archives. The National Archives, the UK National Archives, is the official archive of the UK government in England and Wales. We are also the official publisher for the UK government as well. Our collection is one of the largest in the world. We have over 14 million items, and that number is growing all the time. And these are historic government and public records. So we actually have over 1,000 years of history in our collection. So really substantial time period that we cover. We hold things such as the Domesday Book, a copy of the Magna Carta, but also to modern government papers and digital files. So our collection is really wide-ranging. The bulk of material we hold is paper and parchment records, as you might expect, but also increasingly we have digital records, things like websites, we archive government Twitter feeds. We also have photographs, posters, maps, drawings, and paintings that relate to government, so propaganda or military maps, things like that. So a really wide-ranging collection. Now, all our records were created and collected by UK government department records, UK government departments or major courts of law. And everything we hold in some way relates to government and their interests historically. Now, bearing in mind that these interests have changed over time. So usually what we have is organised by government departments, and these are organised by letter codes. So the diagram on screen shows the various government departments that we hold records about, and the size of them reflects the physical space that the records take up in our repositories. So what this kind of gives an indication of, in a basic way, is the key themes that government were interested in, what collections dominate. So that's Admiralty, Board of Trade, War Office, Foreign Office, Chancery, Colonial Office Records, Treasury. So we can see that kind of war, trade, international relations, and money are some of the key things that are driving government's interests historically. So why would LGBTQ plus history therefore end up in a government archive? So the National Archives records actually provide really important insights into how the government interacted with and viewed LGBTQ plus communities historically. The state's attempts to suppress and regulate sexuality and gender have left us actually with many sources. And so we have a really rich collection in this area. The collection primarily reflects the government's perspective on LGBTQ plus people rather than personal perspectives. So often it's things like police, criminal justice, policy and legislation things that frame our collections in this area. And so we have a very specific angle on these kinds of things. However, in an era where people often didn't feel safe or comfortable to write things down, these narratives are really important. And we can kind of see that in the way that Lister used her code. The policing and surveillance of past LGBT lives is one of the strongest themes relating to LGBT history in our collections. But that predominantly focuses on men because of the historic criminalisation of same-sex relationships between men by the UK government. And so our records are dominated really by male voices in this area. However, the records we'll be looking at today tend to fall outside of these traditional places that LGBT history has been seen in our records. And what I want to try and do is challenge the idea that these histories predominantly fall in these areas and highlight some other records and other sources that can open up possibilities of research. And so we'll be very much doing this today in looking at Anne Lister and her life. So what we're really thinking about here is what I would call life records. So life records relate to LGBT people or people we now might consider to have been LGBT before the language existed, were created incidentally through their interactions with government. They were not created because of their sexuality or gender identity, but can shed light on individuals' identities, sense of self, relationships. And this can be particularly helpful for less visible histories that are less represented in other ways. So it was never criminalised under the UK government to be a lesbian, for example, and so there is an absence of material in that way, in that area, compared to records relating to male homosexuality in the past. So using life records, we can follow threads like wills and death duty records to see who people most cared about or wanted to financially support. Divorce records can tell us things about why people broke up, the other relationships they were having. Census records can help us trace people through time, but also show us family units and how people were choosing to live. So reading between the lines of really what are common family history records can actually reveal a surprising amount in terms of people's relationships. So one way of approaching this is a kind of timeline approach, mapping people's life in terms of key moments. and thinking about then how they would interact with official systems of government. Why might someone have interacted with the state? So that might be at moments like birth, it might be things like court cases, it might be moments like their death or things to do with land and inheritance. And this can help us, mapping these things out can help us think about where to then look in the collections. So with that in mind, what might state records tell us about Anne Lister? So we're going to deep dive into the content now. Now, as I'm speaking to Anne Lister enthusiasts and geeks, I'll be assuming a certain level of knowledge, but I will also explain things to try and ensure a consistent level of understanding and to make clear how our records link to the history. So apologies if some of this is very obvious. It's also worth noting before we look at these records that as a landowner, a traveller and a person of means, Lister left behind a paper trail and official records in a way that not everyone would have historically. So this isn't necessarily the records that you could find about kind of everyone historically, but it's an example of how someone's life can really be traced through this kind of material. So before we approach the actual records, I think it's worth thinking about how to think about a government archive and approaching it. So the kind of lens you approach the government archive with is quite important. Records can tell us very kind of formulaic and standard things as the government intended us to find them. So it might be something like a birth certificate that gives a very standard set information. But as well as reading items for the purpose they were intended, it's possible to kind of read them against the grain and find out unexpected things from them or things that were not intended by the government for these items to be used for. So the items that we hold were working government documents used in government departments, and they weren't created for the purpose of researchers now. So it's worth thinking about that, and that's what often makes them quite challenging to access. So when we're looking at a state archive, it's important to recognise absences and biases, such as heteronormative assumptions and language. It's important to interrogate the language and phrases used. It's important to cross-reference sources. This is a very specific collection from a specific angle. And to read into items for other meanings. So I think this is particularly useful here to think about people's connections, relationships, where money moves, and what that can tell us more broadly about someone's life as well. So with that in mind, we're going to have a think about Anne's early life, Lister's early life. So as far as my research has been able to show so far, Lister had little reason to interact with the state in her early life. In her early years, born in 1791, this really predated many of the formal state mechanisms we now associate with record keeping. So at this point, there were no civil registrations of birth, marriages, or deaths. That was until 1837. No national census that recorded individuals by name until 1841. And limited bureaucratic interaction for women of her class, unless they were maybe involved in legal disputes or criminal cases. Very rare cases, kind of state employment, but not so common in that era. So I would say this meant for much of her youth, there was simply no obvious reason for her name to appear in government records. Now, please do challenge me on this if you can think of ways, because I would love to find more records, but that's my understanding so far. So because we had Anne with her detailed diary starting at 15, we have already a rich source for her relatively early life, and this is really the strongest source along with local archive records for this period. However, as the role of the state became more formal and more all-encompassing, more records do start to exist. So really, we can start to trace Lister through government records kind of after this time. And where we can pick this up in this presentation is the point of Lister and Walker's relationship. So from 1832, they were in a relationship, and in formal legal documents that we hold, Walker described them as having been for many years on great intimacy. The pair formed a deep bond and considered themselves married. And so I've just got an image from our collections of Holy Trinity Church, Goodrham Gate. And this is from 1908, but just reflecting the fact that they undertook that really symbolic and important step. The main kind of first place we can see them is actually through travel records. So in an era far before same-sex marriage was made legal, the couple found other ways of showing their love and dedication. And one way was through sharing their passions, including travel together. In 1839, Lister and Walker embarked on their 2-year journey across Scandinavia. And Lister enjoyed traveling, driven by her adventurous nature. So we have related records to these journeys. You may not know, but before the First World War in the UK, it was not compulsory for someone travelling abroad to apply for a passport. Possession of a passport was confined largely to merchants and diplomats, and the vast majority of those travelling overseas had no formal documents. So what we have here is an entry book of passports from a series that contains registers of passports issued, showing the intended destination of the applicant. And Anne Lister and Anne Walker are mentioned, showing the kind of their intention to travel, but also the kind of connections they had and the way they were following official processes, as this wasn't something that the kind of average person would necessarily have engaged in. Unfortunately, the trip would obviously end in tragedy, with Lister sadly dying in September 1840 in Georgia. So these passport records, and I think this is typical of what we can see in government records, don't just tell us about their travels. We can read other things into them. So the In Search of Anne Walker team have used them to piece together some of what happened after after Lister's death. So we can see that on the 10th of November 1840, Captain George Mackay Sutherland was issued a passport in London to travel to the continent. So that's not long after Lister's death. Entries for passports were issued to Captain Sutherland and Anne Walker in Warsaw in 1841, January 1841, with the destination of Paris. So what this has been used to do is help map Walker and Sutherland's journey across Europe, going from to Moscow, Warsaw, Paris, and then home. And so this is kind of a really important document for understanding that particular narrative. And it comes from these British consulate records from Warsaw. In Lister's kind of timeline that we were thinking about, we've now reached the point of her death, and we can think about what records might survive relating to this. Fortunately, the couple had chosen to reflect their relationship in one of the few legal ways that was available to them through the legal documents of wills. Now, at the National Archives, we hold a substantial collection of wills, so several million. And these include bundles of original wills in the series Prob 10. These are generally signed and sealed by the testators and witnesses. We also have copies in Prob 11, which are digitalized and name searchable. So these are the easier ones to access and the kind of more globally accessible ones. And these versions were originally in bound volumes, or are still in bound volumes, but available digitalized. So if you're interested in looking at these, I'd recommend starting with the Prob 11s. But personally, I love the Prob 10s because of the intimacy of the kind of signatures and the seals that you can see. So we only hold wills that were approved through the Prerogative Court of Canterbury. However, this was by far the largest jurisdiction administering wills. So it gives a reasonable chance of you finding someone who was in the position to and chose to leave a will. Wills approved in other places are harder to find. Some do survive, but not as consistently. And in these records, we can find traces of Lister and Walker's lives. Both had rewritten their wills to reflect their relationship not long before they travelled. Now, these are some of our more well-known items relating to Lister and Walker. And on screen is the kind of Prob 10 version of Lister's will. The couple each left the other a lifetime inheritance of their properties with a clause that said if the other should marry, they would be disinherited as they should have then departed this life. So this clause sounds quite dramatic, but was agreed on by both parties and was a common form of wording at the time. In many ways designed to protect individuals and estates due to women's limited property rights at the time. This stipulation was also recorded in previous versions of Lister's will, relating to other partners and family members. Many of Lister's former lovers had married, and Lister's desire to protect Shibden Hall was clear. Ultimately, their wills reflected their deep love, but also the challenges of female inheritance and the importance of their family estates to them. Now, the versions that we hold are the final versions of each. So Walker's will does not fully reflect the importance of Lister in her life as it once would have, as it had been updated. But to skip ahead, when Walker eventually died, despite the decade and a half that had passed since Lister's death, Walker's final gestures still showed the continued care and importance of Lister and Lister's family to her. She left money to some of Lister's relatives and gifted Dr. John Lister her church pew. And these acts reflected who she was thinking about in her final days, demonstrating the kind of enduring connection between the couple. Other family and friends are also reflected in some of these wills and can be followed through them. So they have potential beyond these two individuals' wills as well. Just to reflect a little bit on the importance and use of probate records, they're a really important place for tracing women's relationships through history, as they aren't always as as other records aren't always as clear about people's emotions, sentiments, and relationships. What tells us more than who someone leaves their deepest and most important possessions to? What tells us more than who someone is financially trying to look after? And they have often quite legal language in them, but even that can be read into when people are referred to as spinster, or people's friendship is mentioned. Some of this could hide relationships, but actually, if we're critical of the language, we can also see meaning in those things as well. Now, not all examples will be as clear as Lister's case, where there's other surviving evidence that we can use, but there is still a lot of potential in these records. Our wills are searchable by the name of the individual, but the actual text within them is not searchable. That's pretty standard for our records, that only the kind of titles of things are searchable on the catalogue. So this is a potential treasure trove, I think, of lesbian stories, but they can be hard to access if you don't know who you're looking for. You can't kind of just browse them for these kinds of relationships. However, it's a really important extra source to consider if you're trying to understand someone's relationship, sexuality, who they're gifting important things to at the point of death. So we're going to move on to chancery records, another place of great potential in our records. So legal records are a really valuable resource for tracing the stories of wealthy or landed individuals in this era. Many older records, including chancery records, are not very well catalogued in our collections. So it's important to remember that these records were created for practical uses by courts and governments and not for future researchers. So all of that makes it kind of a challenge sometimes to search these records. Walker faced numerous challenges following Lister's death, including legal disputes over Lister's will and the management of the estate. One significant case was Walker versus Gray, where Walker, described of unsound mind, was supplantive against William Gray, the family solicitor, and Lister relatives John and Mary Ann Lister. The case revolved, as far as I can tell, around disagreements over the cost of their travels and the rents from Shibden Hall, as well as various other things. There's a long list of various things that came up in this case. For some context, the Court of Chancery, which operated in England and Wales from the late 14th century until 1875, handled civil disputes based on principles of equity rather than strict common law. This made it a crucial institution for resolving cases particularly related to inheritance, property, debts, marriage, settlements, trade, and bankruptcy. The records in this particular series, C14, so C relating to Chancery, as I explained the kind of letter codes earlier, consists of pleadings in equity cases from 1842 to 1853. And these documents again cover a wide variety of matters, particularly disputes about wills and estate administration, as well as commercial and land disputes. Now, pleadings are statements made by parties in a case, including bills of complaint, answers, and replications. And these documents provide insights into legal arguments and positions of the parties involved. So there's a lot of potential in these records, and actually in this particular case, it's very well catalogued, and so we can find this information about Anne Walker and the Lister family relatively easily on the catalogue. But there are a lot of challenges that come with these materials. So this is the actual item when you order it up. It's pretty epic in scale. Not all of it refers to this specific dispute, but I've got my hand in the pictures for scale, so you can see that these are big, hefty documents, and so they take quite a lot of understanding, and they have quite a lot of challenges. So really, I think this record needs some really dedicated research time, and I'd love to do that at some point. But equally, I'd encourage anyone else to do that as well. Feel free to get in contact with me if you'd like to do that, and I can always see if I can provide images or other things. And just to emphasize that further, so when that kind of scroll is unrolled, these kind of quite hefty, big pages are crammed full of tiny words. So there's lots of challenges to kind of engaging in these materials. There's old language, there's specialist legal language, there's the kind of legal context that is so helpful to piecing it all together. There's kind of limited context because these would have been used by people who were specialists in this kind of thing, so that can make it quite hard to understand. Hopefully it's clear from the introduction I did earlier, but I'm not a legal historian, for example, but I've been working closely with my colleagues who are. The physical handling of items, the size and age of them make them tricky to handle. Although luckily, because they're vellum, they're quite tough. So they're not fragile in that way, but they do take some kind of wrangling with. And again, the level of cataloguing can be tricky. So I think although this item is pretty easy to find on the catalogue, there's likely to be other related items, but they might need things like indexes to be used to access them, or they might be in uncatalogued boxes. So that is challenging too. So at the moment, I certainly know a limited amount about this case, but I just wanted to show that these kind of things in Chancery do exist, and also point you to some kind of related material that is really rich as well. So the documents in C106 consist of a variety of private papers submitted to the courts of Chancery by plaintiffs and defendants as evidence in their cases. And while most of these papers will return to their owners, those that remain are a major source of social, economic, and business history. And these collections can include intimate correspondence, family papers, such as diaries and wills, estate papers, and accounts. So they can be useful for business, professional, and trade kind of histories. Each items in this series that I've looked at so far is a kind of treasure trove of archival goodies, and there is a box of items, this box that's depicted on screen, that relates to that previous case in the C14 records. So it relates to the case of Walker versus Gray. Now, this kind of seemingly quite random box of items, when you start looking at it, covers material from 1582 to 1840, including some things like deeds that go further back. And the box of items is really dominated by material that relates to Lister and Walker's European travels and general estate finances. Again, there's a lot of potential in these records, but they also need some kind of careful exploring to really piece together the meaning of all the different items and why these items in particular were included as evidence in this court case. But I just want to talk you through some of the potential of what we can learn from these records, even if it's kind of removing them from the context of that court case and just using them as general insights into Lister and Walker's lives. So there are lots of items that relate to accounts and figures, including an account and memo book in Lister's own hand and material from Walker referencing estate management after Lister's death. So this one on screen is an account book of Lister's relating to rates on the land at Shibden Hall in 1833. So although this is a later case, we can see that items are relating to earlier dates and also can tell us about Lister's life. There are occasional notes by Lister, some in the infamous code. So this is on the back of a letter dated 1835. And some of that has been translated, including in Jill Liddington's book, Female Fortune, which says, Friday, 27th, no kiss, rainy, windy morning, and on it goes. So we can see evidence of that as well. There's quite a lot of property information relating to various Lister properties and land, some predating Lister's time at Shibden. This particular one is 1837 and gives various details of tenants and the rents as well. There's material relating to mines and technology. So this poster is a notice to coal owners in Halifax. So it gives us that kind of more general context as well. And there are also notebooks listing Lister and Walker's clothes and associated costs. So this is from 1840, so kind of just predating their travels, so probably relating to the items they were taking with them or buying or packing. So on here we have lists of the two individuals. So Lister at the top of the page with things like 2 nightcaps, 1 petticoat, flannel drawers, flannel waistcoat, shirts, things like that listed. Whereas Walker has her own list saying petticoats, drawers, nightshirt, muslin body, nightcap, stockings, and things like that. So the material about clothing gives us a kind of an insight into these individuals, what they were physically wearing, how items could be slightly kind of gender questioning for Lister as well, in terms of how she was presenting. And I think this is quite powerful. There's something very intimate about seeing lists of clothes that relating to individuals. It gives us a sense of them as people. There are receipts from various hotels and bits of transport from their travels from Denmark to Moscow. I think these items really show how vast and extensive their adventures were in times where this type of travel was obviously challenging, particularly the kind of mountaineering type things, but all of it really. So this gives us a sense of the privilege and expense of these experiences as well. So this particular letter was received on Tuesday, the 6th of April, 1841 for Miss Walker at Shibden Hall. Some of the other letters in this box have been used by the In Search of Anne Walker team to prove her location after Lister's death. So there's one letter dated on the 19th of February 1841 that stated that Walker had recently returned to Halifax. Another letter was received and answered from Robert Parker to Walker, also showing where she was at the time. So this helps place Walker as returned from Russia in February 1841, helping to dispel the myth of Walker and Lister kind of coming back together with Lister's body. So a really important and poignant part of the kind of story that is helped to be developed by the survival of these materials. Sorry. So these items related to a chancery case after Lister's death still reveal information about her life. The box of items also highlights the complexity of managing the estate, dealing with new technological advances, water rents, and allocation of church pews. It underscores the significant administrative burden Walker had to bear while navigating extreme grief. And others have noticed things like funeral-related material in this box of items, detailing kind of costs, for example, as well as Walker's use of mourning stationery. So there's various things we can understand from this. I really think the box of items deserves greater attention, and there's undoubtedly more to learn from chancery materials in our collections in general. But it certainly highlights the surprising and unexpected material that can be found in formal legal records and indeed state archives. So we're going to move on to another source, the census. So this is a very classic archival source for family history research. The census was a survey of the population on one particular day, and they were taken every 10 years in the UK. The introduction of the census marked a pivotal shift in state record keeping, and that started in 1841 in a way that listed all citizens. and it enabled systematic documentation of population data and vital life events for governance, identity, and historical research eventually. So from 1841 to 1921, we can use surviving census records to focus on people's home lives and the family units they were living in. LGBTQ plus people can be found on the enumeration sheets of all censuses, just as everyone else can in the population. However, until very recently, we were not able to be recorded in a way that acknowledged our sexuality, same-sex partnerships, gender diversity, or transitions. So the information can sometimes be limited by the kind of bureaucracy of the state that meant certain details were prioritized and captured. The census used binary gender categories, for example, and did not allow the recording of sexuality. For many, the risk would have been too significant to try and record this anyway, even if the option had been available, given the context of the time. Now, unfortunately, the first major census was held several months after Lister's death, so it's not useful for finding information out about her. But the 1841 census shows the Shibden household shortly afterwards, and we can see Walker listed there as of independent means alongside numerous servants living at Shibden Hall. So it's a useful source in that way to get the insight about who's at the house at that particular date. But as we know, Walker was not to live permanently at Shibden Hall. 3 years after Lister's death, she was declared of unsound mind. Now, while proper lunatics was dealt with locally, the care of people deemed to be mentally ill or incapable of looking after themselves who owned significant amounts of property was administered by the Crown at this point, who took charge of their property and possessions. Individuals could be brought to the Lord Chancellor's attention by relatives, solicitors, trustees, executors, or creditors, essentially anyone with a legal or financial interest in the estate. The lunacy commissioners might also intervene if they suspected mismanagement of an asylum inmate's funds. So the whole point of getting a person declared of unsound mind by a chancery inquisition was to take away his or her power of independent legal action in the disposition of property. It had nothing to do with the committal to an asylum, which was a separate medical issue. The Lord Chancellor had to establish whether or not a person was of sound mind, and he did that by ordering a commission to hold an inquisition. So in this case, the commission assessed Walker's state of mind. The processes were long and complex, involving initial petitions and hearing, and we hold the formal inquisition record, which you can see on screen. So this meant Walker lost control of the estate that Lister had so carefully gifted her. And Marlene has done some great work on this, so it's worth looking at more detail at that as well. There are some other records relating to Walker's asylum stays in our collections, including registers of bonds given as security for the administration of a property of persons of unsound mind. So these reveal some of the places that Walker stayed. So as well as under the care of Dr. Belcombe, Walker also spent time at Sussex House in Hammersmith. And I'm based in West London, so very close to Hammersmith. So if anyone knows the exact location now of where that is, I'd be very interested to go and visit. I know it's on the river. But yeah, there are interesting things we can gain from these kind of state perspectives on mental health at the time, partly because of the property involved. Now, we very much looked at Walker and Lister's relationship, but I think it is worth also saying that we do have a kind of lunacy inquisition record around about Eliza Raine as well. So in this record from 1816, so slightly earlier, Raine is listed as spinster of Clifton, Yorkshire. So two of these records at least relate to Lister's lovers and past lovers. So it's interesting to note the amount of individuals related to Lister who had relationships with her, who experienced mental health challenges, or at least were perceived to at the time, possibly reflecting the stigma and attitudes that these women all faced by living their lives in kind of unconventional and different ways at the time. So we're going to return to the census. We're going kind of roughly chronologically through this in terms of the records that survive. So the census really helps us to track people's movements over time. So by 1851, Walker was at her previous family home at Cliff Hill. Unfortunately, the censuses are too early to fully benefit our research into these individuals. But it is worth thinking about their use for tracing other historical lesbian relationships. On the more recent censuses, it's also possible to search by other categories of information, so not just by looking for individuals. So you can search the relationship to head of household field with certain keywords and try more speculative searches. So you can try phrases like partners, friends, or joint owners and see who then is returned. Now, just because someone listed themselves as joint owners, it doesn't mean definitive proof of a same-sex relationship, but it can be used with other records to build up a picture of someone's life. So that could be the starting point, and then you could use other records to kind of interrogate someone's life and understand more about them. Or if you're researching other places and you want more certainty about someone's relationship and where they were living, you can go back into the census, and that can kind of help confirm people's potential relationships and add an extra source. It's also worth questioning the burden of evidence we put on LGBTQ plus relationships compared to heterosexual ones in terms of this idea of proof. The census absolutely shows potential and possibility in terms of finding LGBTQ plus lives. So just to reflect slightly on other records that are potentially available. So there are also incidental records about spaces and places linked to the couple. So we have some Office of Works records in the series Work 14, and they very much look at historical properties. And so we can see Shibden Hall mentioned in there. The records are from 1930, but actually they also show previous plans of the property. So for example, in the 19th century. So just showing that there's various places you can look. And it's not just the individuals we can trace, but we can think about the spaces they engaged with. Okay, the very final section that is really brief. I know this is a very global research community. Not everyone will be able to easily access the materials we have at the National Archives. But for people who are interested, these are publicly accessible records. You can use our system discovery to search. It's the kind of key way into the collections. Unfortunately, it's not like Google. It's not as intuitive. So you have to be very specific with your search terms. You can use things like wildcard searches to help. But you need to be thinking about the historic language that might have been used. We catalogue as much as possible with the language of the time. And it's very much worth going through trial and error. So sometimes things won't come back, but you can try other variations. And it might be that we're not the best place for the records you're looking for. I always think it's good to frame your research in terms of why would the government be interested in this thing? For example, it might be financial, it might be public disorder, it might be the registration of citizens for whatever reason. And then you can think, well, are we the best place or somewhere else better? Or it can help you narrow your thought process in terms of thinking which bit of government would be interested. So it helps direct you to the right government department where you might want to then look. So Treasury or Home Office or probate records. And then you can use our research guides. So we have over 200 of these to help support you through your research and help you navigate our records. There's so many records that you often do need support. So while you can try our search function discovery, it's actually really good to go through these records where certain series or government departments have their own processes. So something like Chancery that's quite complex, it's quite good to go straight to the research guide and have that support working through our records. So these can really help offer you avenues and research support, helping you think where to look in the collections. You can look here by government department, or you can look for things like topic. So for example, we have a research guide on sexuality and gender identity history. So that can help you navigate these collections if that's your particular interest. that helps suggest language and terms you might use and that kind of thing. Now, this research guide is in the process of being updated. So I'm hoping to finish that soon. It will take quite a while to go live though. But that is coming soon, and it will hopefully be more robust in offering research options, including some of what I'm talking about today, like life records and how those can be best optimized for this kind of research. It is worth bearing in mind the challenges of these records when you engage with them. So poor document descriptions, just because your results aren't coming back successfully, it doesn't mean items aren't there. You might just have to use things like indexes or other ways into the records. Challenges we have a physical space. Some items are stored offsite, although that's mainly the name-rich ones that are available in other versions. So you might be able to access them on things like Ancestry. Archival research is really time-consuming, so it's important to bear in mind that. And then born digital records is a challenge we currently have, but that's less relevant in this area. But the way things are coming to us in digital formats like emails and Word documents. So you're very welcome to visit the archive if you're able to. I know that won't be a possibility for everyone. We're based in Kew in West London. But for people not able to visit, we have got lots of content on the website. So various kind of articles and education resources, but it's also worth looking at digitalized items like Lister and Walker's wills as well, which can be globally accessible. So just to wrap things up, we've looked through key state records relating to Anne Lister, from travel records to probate records, chancery records, census records, and mental health relating records, which I think reveal surprisingly intimate details for a government archive and bring unexpected insights. There are many other kind of more important in many ways personal sources, but I think together these records help us really present something quite comprehensive. And there's definitely more to interrogate. I just wanted to say that there is a lot of potential in terms of lesbian histories, gender diverse histories that can be traced through the archive. So we also hold things like the will of medical pioneer Sophia Jex-Blake because it was disputed. She was in a long-term relationship with her partner, Margaret Todd, who's mentioned in the will. We have records relating to the ladies of Llangollen, Irish women living in Wales who Anne Lister kind of admired. We've got a photo of Plas Newydd where they lived for over 50 years together on screen. We have records relating to Radcliffe Hall, the author who was censored. So we have censorship records relating to her. But also she's listed on the 1921 census with her lover Una Trowbridge. And they chose to list themselves as joint head of household, which I think is quite an equitable way of describing their relationship. In quite a bold way in the context of the time where there wasn't that space to record your relationships in that way. We also have love letters relating to Fanny and Stella, two individuals born male but who use male and female pronouns interchangeably in the Victorian period. And these letters are held because of an unsuccessful court case against them, but still show a really personal insight into their lives and relationships. So Lister's coded diaries are a radical example of surviving queer evidence. But there are other sources as well that we can explore. And just to say that this work is very much continuing. So we're always trying to find more ways to highlight Lister, Walker, and other individuals in our collections. So we have in the past commissioned a artwork by Sarah Tannant-Jones of Lister. We've also done recent education work. So there's now education resources, a history mysteries school resource on our website, which was an assembly format that went out to about 3,000 pupils and still has legacy kind of content, including a film on our website. And we have things like our it's a few years ago, an exhibition with love where we showed Lister's will. So there are all sorts of things where we've tried to share these records, but we will absolutely continue to try and do more to understand them and help others work to understand them as well, because this is really a collective effort. So that's a bit of an overview. There is now some time for questions. But I hope that's been some kind of insights you might not have considered into how state records can be used in this way. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
So, yes, Vicky, wow, that was a hell of a ride of information. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, we do have a couple of questions. The first one, I'm just going to read it. I don't understand the question really, but maybe you are going to understand it. It says, on the passport, did Anne have a different title to Anne Walker, who was Miss?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the kind of prefix that was used there. But I would say there were also quite a few inaccuracies in records at the time, so I wouldn't necessarily completely rely on what's said in them anyway. Um, so, for example, on the wills, they're both written as Anne without any, for example. So we do see kind of inaccuracies in state records. So there might be some interesting insights in terms of people being described as miss or otherwise, but it's also hard to be definitive with what that might mean, and if it was intentional or unintentional. I don't know if that quite answers the question, but that's how I'm gonna interpret it.
Let's see, Catherine, if this was a good explanation. Okay, so the next would be in this evidence box of the Walker case. Um, do you have something that you think of that was really particularly interesting, or and why?
Sorry, in terms of the chancery, was that
Yeah.
the I mean, I just find the box of items in its entirety kind of fascinating. And like every page or item I open, I think there's other possibilities. There's not a lovely kind of background history of explaining the relevance of all the items. So I think every item provides kind of exciting ways of kind of following the threads. But what I really liked when I started looking at it was the list of clothes, which I found yeah, I kind of almost emotive way of kind of understanding their lives in a way that felt different to some of the other materials that I think I'd come across.
Do you know any other case with such an evidence box, or is this the only one you know?
Not relating to them, no. It's the only one I'm aware of, and those are relatively well catalogued. So I wouldn't expect to find more of those, but I think I think legal records more broadly, I think there might be others. Uh, yeah, not boxes of material like that, but other legal records. But yeah, that's the only one I've come across and that I think has been referenced elsewhere.
Okay, but you have so many items, maybe somewhere. So,
Exactly. There's a lot of potential, but yeah, sometimes tracking things down can be difficult.
yeah. My own question would be, are all the items in the National Archives under Crown copyright?
That is a good question. Yes, they are. They're Crown copyright. There are some exceptions, but I don't think from this kind of period. Um, we have anomalies like we have Metropolitan Police records. Their copyright is still with them. But yeah, most items are Crown copyright, and from this period, that would certainly be the case. Yeah.
Okay. And there's another question, if or how other than wills and the Chancery papers, how these other papers find their way into the National Archives.
Yeah. So kind of like I highlighted it at the start, it's all to do with some kind of connection to government. Um, so the records all come to us from government departments. So it really depends on the specific interest. So um, the case of Sophia Jex Blake, that was because the will was disputed. That was Treasury solicitors that was interested. The the uh, photo of Plas Newydd linked to the ladies of Llangollen was similar to the photographs of the plans of Shibden Hall that came through Department of Works files. So yeah, it's often it's all about the interests of government departments, and the interests of government can be different to what we might think. Uh, it's worth saying, we only hold about 5% of what was created by government. So not everything gets to us. And to some extent, that's even more apparent with items historically. We now have clear, transparent selection processes. We guide government departments, they select materials themselves, but we've only formally existed as the kind of institution we are now since the kind of 19th century. So before that, what survived was much more random, dependent on kind of courts or institutions. So chancery material has survived well, but other things less so. So it's kind of it's an interesting and kind of complex story in terms of what survives, but it is ultimately about the interests of government. And as someone said, their government touches everything. So it is more all-encompassing than you might think, but there are also gaps and absences in what was considered historically important.
Okay, so last question, but we have a couple of minutes. Can you explain your role at the archives and your own research focus, if any, beyond your work? And can you share info on these exhibits on the LIBW Facebook page?
Yeah, so in terms of my particular role, so I think, as I said, kind of principal diverse history specialist, that can mean a lot of different things. In a collection our size, there's lots of areas of diversity, lots of areas of traditionally marginalized histories. So I've tended to do a lot on sexuality, history of sexuality. So other areas that I've covered are the policing of LGBT spaces historically. That tends to be more kind of 20th century, but I've done a lot of work on places like there was the Caravan Club, which was an LGBT friendly club from the 1930s, and other clubs that set up around that time. So very much London focused. So so queer spaces is quite a strong theme in my work, and also suffragettes. So I'm kind of already slightly gearing up to our next anniversary in the UK, the Equal Franchise Act, which fully enfranchised women on equal terms with men, which was in 1928. So they're some of the key things that I've traditionally worked on, as well as tracing these kind of other relationships in the archive. And I also I have quite a big public engagement focus in my work, because I think we're all kind of record specialists in the area I work, but I think particularly for this history, it's really important and significant for people to know these documents exist and to make it as clear as possible and available as possible. So I tend to work quite a lot on events and exhibitions and other engagement activities. So we had a Pride Family Day, for example, last September, and we'll hopefully do something like that again. So that's in terms of my role. But yeah, I'm happy to share anything on the relevant Facebook pages if someone can direct me in the right direction. I'm happy to share things.
I think we will be able to do that. Yeah. Okay, so to sum up all the thank yous to you, I just quote, wow, this was over the top. Wow. So many informations, and it seems that people think it was a very fascinating talk. So thank you very much again, Vicky, for giving us all this information and participate in our research summit. We are now going to shuffle everyone back into the break.